Welcome to the Empowered Podcast, episode 23. In today's podcast, I wanted to do something a little bit different. Before we get into that, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening to the Empowered Podcast. I'm your host, Ellery Wells, and this is the podcast designed to help you overcome the challenges you're facing, develop yourself into the person that you know you can be and that you want to be, and just destroy the challenges that you are facing on a day-to-day basis. In today's episode, I wanted to do something a little bit different, like I just mentioned. I'm sitting at home on a Thursday, and I wanted to be able to have an impromptu, just completely out of the blue, unscheduled podcast interview, and I was able to do that with my friend James Kinson. He had a short window during his busy day, and he responded to a message that I'd put out on Facebook, which, by the way, if you're not connected to me on Facebook, go to facebook.com/empowering the 80%, and that's the Facebook page for my blog and for the podcast officially. Anyway, if you're not following me, you should do that. But I put out a request. Does anybody want to have a chat for the podcast, just spur of the moment right now? And James responded, and I'm so glad he did. He is such a cool guy. He's doing some really excellent things, and I'm excited to share this very short, very brief, very unscheduled interview with each of you. And we talk about his process over the last 7 months. 7 months ago, in his words, nobody knew who he was, and today he's got a blog, he's got a podcast, he's shaken hands with some of the biggest names in the new media industry. He was even asked to be on a TV show. That's insane. 7 months ago, nobody knew who he was, so he says. And now he might have the chance to be on a TV show. That's insane. That's just the power of what podcasting can do and just putting yourself out there into the world. I'm really proud of James, and I'm really excited to share this interview with you. It's kind of off the beaten path for us. We'll still follow up with our next interview that I teased you with at the beginning or at the end of last episode. So without further delay, we'll go right into the interview with my friend James Kinson, the Cash Car Convert. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Empowered Podcast. This is kind of an impromptu conversation between me and the man himself, the Cash Car Convert, James Kinson. I'll have James on in a future episode to talk about the Cash Car Convert process. But today I want to talk about why he started a podcast. He and I both are following a similar path, and that's why I wanted to have him on the show today. James, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. I really appreciate you having me on. You and I have been really close since we met, and we've developed a really nice friendship over really a short period of time, but I really appreciate knowing you.
Well, absolutely. We just to give everyone a background, James and I met in November at the Platform Conference up in Dallas, Texas. We stayed in touch just a little bit, and we met again at New Media Expo, and we've talked on the phone and communicated several times since then. And over those past few months, James has definitely become a friend, an inspiration, and as I mentioned just a second ago, James has started his own podcast and started a blog called The Cash Car Convert. You can find that on iTunes. If you're like me, you can listen to it on Stitcher. You can go to cashcarconvert.com and listen there and read the blogs there. But James talks about, and I don't want to go into too much detail today, but James talks about, what's your tagline, James? Sell your car and buy a beater, right?
Yeah, that Dave Ramsey says, sell a car and buy a beater, and I want to help people buy better beaters.
So back us up maybe however long it was, maybe 6 months or so, whenever it was, and you had that first light bulb idea, hey, I want to or I need to start a podcast. Can you rewind us a little bit back, tell us how far that was and why you got started doing that?
Yeah, it goes back. It's kind of funny. I didn't take action as quickly as I should have, but once I discovered Dave Ramsey's methodologies of getting debt free and him telling people to sell the car and buy a beater, I started thinking about how I might be able to help people. I knew I had a skill set around buying cars and inexpensive cars that were good, and I started thinking about how I might be able to help. And it wasn't until Thanksgiving of 2012. We went to Atlanta to visit some of my wife's family. And while we were there were two young men who had just purchased cars for cash, and neither one of them were running. And so they were kind of stuck. They
Ouch.
couldn't get to work, right? And it was a problem. And all I could think about was I wish they had contacted me. I could have helped them find a better car. So coming back on that long drive, that 14-hour drive back to Dallas-Fort Worth, it hit me that I needed to write a book to be able to help people buy better cash cars, to get that information out there. And then I started thinking about how, a book's a pretty daunting thing to just take on. I thought, well, I can blog a book and you just do it articles, and then I can, put those posts together and create something. And I thought that I can do. And then I started thinking about the fact that, I personally don't read blogs very much because I consume all my content by podcast, because I just don't have time to sit down and read that much. So that's the process that got me into thinking about podcasting. And so I started thinking about that, and that was, again, November 2012. So finally, in July of 2013, I actually bought a laptop specifically for doing podcasting and blogging, and I started my blog in August of 2013, and just started writing posts. And along the way, I knew I wanted to create a podcast, but I wasn't sure exactly how to get that rolling. And ultimately, I met some folks at an event called PodCamp Dallas, which happened in September of 2013. And I had already recorded my first episode like 2 or 3 times by then. And everybody I met there...
I know about that.
Right, yeah. Everybody I met there, Mark Mason, Cynthia Sanchez, they were all telling me, just get it out, just put it out. And I just couldn't force myself to pull the trigger on that. So I kept, putting it off and, trying to, find equipment that would make my voice sound, appropriate, or at least, passable for a podcast. And so then I went to the Platform Conference, and there I met Ray Edwards and Cliff Ravenscraft, and they also told me, just get it out the door. And they also helped. One of the things I struggled with a bit, Ellery, is that I had this idea, but I couldn't find anybody else that was doing what I was interested in doing, and it kind of made me question whether it was even viable. So I eventually, talking to people like Cliff and Ray Edwards and a lot of other folks, they helped me kind of be more willing to think about this in a more positive way, and that, yes, it was a viable idea. Yes, it would work. And, no, I wasn't crazy for thinking of it. And so that helped give me the confidence to push forward. And then I did ultimately get my podcast launch on December 31st. My wife pushed me she was like, you can do this, get it launched in December. And well, I just barely
So
did.
Now you can say since 2013 instead of 2014.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Well, how did you, because I've got a few projects that I'm working on, and you and I have talked about some of those over the last couple months, but how did you decide, well, is this something that no one has done before, so I should do it, versus people have done this and it didn't work, why should I jump into this as well? How did you figure that out?
Yeah.
Because I know there's a lot of people out there. I've talked to some of you guys that are listening to this right now that are thinking about starting a podcast. You see the benefits and some of those things, but you're really unsure of your idea. So James, can you talk to those people? How did, am I first, or am I going to be the next casualty of this podcast topic?
Yeah, I did struggle with that a lot. And I think that was one of the things that kept me from taking action any sooner. The way I ultimately handled it is, I checked, Dave Ramsey's site. I couldn't find anything there. I checked the web in general. I couldn't find anything there. And not just podcast topics, but blog topics that really dealt with this kind of thing. And I guess in a sense, I can get that, right? I mean, who really thinks about going and helping people buy low-end cars under $5,000, right? How much is that really needed?
Yeah, but at the same time, not to cut you off, but Dave Ramsey's whole, he, however millions a year, but it's probably like 50, 60 million, I guess.
Yeah.
Teaching common sense.
Right. And that's the thing that kept driving me. I kept thinking, if I could just tap into Dave's audience, I know this is a good idea from that perspective. The question was whether I could get to those folks. And so what I ultimately decided on this thing is, as I just said, I'm just going to bite the bullet. I'm going to invest. I'm going to buy the laptop. I'm going to get the blog going. I'm going to start writing content. I'm going to create a Facebook page and a Twitter account and get a podcast going. And I'm going to get this information out there, and I'll test the market and find out, if I can make the connections and if I can make some things happen. And again, along the way, I got more and more validation. The more people I spoke with, the more people told me, you're on to something. I think this is a brilliant idea. And that gave me more confidence. But initially, when I didn't have that, the thing that kept me going is I knew I loved the new media. I knew I loved, looking at other people's blogs and listening to other people's podcasts. So what I told myself was, even if I fail with this effort, I will learn enough along the way that I will come up with something else that I can use this information and create a new podcast or a new blog, and I'll be that much further ahead because I've already taken the steps to learn how to do it.
What would you say the best or the biggest benefit of starting the blog and podcast has been? Because if I understand right, before August of last year, so that's what 7 months or so. Yeah. You were working. You didn't really have this hobby at all. Maybe you were interested in it. But how is your life different today? This being was February 27th or something like that. Yeah. How is it different today than it was August or let's say July of 2013?
Yeah. So at the time, say July, I am so down, I was going to say down in the weeds, but that's really the wrong thing. I just wasn't in the game. I mean, I was listening to people's content, and I think it might have been the Internet Business Mastery guys, Jeremy and Jason, who I met at New Media Expo. I know you did as well. Super guys. But they made a statement on one of their podcasts that said, at some point, you've got to stop listening. I think it's at some point, you got to stop consuming content, and you've got to start creating content. And that was one of the things that kind of spurred me to get going. And so I went from being completely obscure, nobody knowing who I am at all, to now, and especially through the Platform Conference and New Media Expo, there is almost no podcaster that I listen to on a regular basis that I haven't personally shaken their hand. Many of them know my name. I've exchanged Twitter and Facebook posts with them. So my life in that regard has changed a lot. The podcast in particular put me more on the map. The blog, I was still pretty obscure. I think getting out to the conferences made a big difference, but I also think just having the podcast out there, it lends an air of credibility to you that you don't have without it. And it's opened me up now where, I've been invited to speak on other people's podcasts. I've been invited to speak at a meetup event here in Dallas, which is a new thing for me. I had a gentleman reach out to me about potentially speaking on a local television show. So I've had all of those things happen around my podcast.
You're going to be on TV?
Well, I've been asked to do it, but
that's awesome, dude.
There's been no follow up on it, so we'll see how it plays out. But yeah, I had at least an initial inquiry about it. So yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. So from nobody knowing who James Kinson was, or the Cash Cart Convert was not even an idea yet, to being asked to be on a TV show. That's insane, man.
Yeah, there's a local news program here in Texas, in Dallas-Fort Worth, and it's a daily news program, and it's on for an hour a day. And
wow.
One of the gentlemen I met at the PodCamp Dallas meetup is a news reporter, and he's had Cynthia Sanchez on that same show, and he sent me an inquiry. And again, it's been a while, so I think it's one of those things where maybe when they don't have anybody else to put on, or somebody cancels, then maybe he'll call me ask me to be on.
Well, that's awesome. One more question for you. On Facebook over the last several months, and then again over the last couple of days, been not really debating with someone I know. He's a fellow blogger. Won't mention his name because I kind of disagree with him. But his opinion on personal branding is very different from mine, and I would be curious to know what your thoughts on the James Kinson personal brand or the Cash Car Convert brand, how if you've made an intentional effort to do what some people might call self-promotion, what your thoughts are on that, if you haven't, and then also for the blog and podcast.
Yeah, so I have done some intentional things, right? I mean, going to the conferences and the meetups were exactly about that, getting my name out there, getting my idea known. Because here, the way I liken it to, Ellery, is, it's the old, if a tree falls in the forest, does anybody hear it, right? And so you can be, a dynamic speaker. You could have a great message to deliver, but if nobody can hear you, it doesn't matter. And in fact, Scott Stratton, who spoke at NMX, he's got 140,000 Twitter followers or something. And he did something where he created like a new Twitter account, and he tweeted something out and nobody came back to him, right? It was just crickets. And he's like, wow, is this what it's really like to be a new person on Twitter? This is really, this is not fun. And I think that's the challenge, because I know there are people out there who talk about using Twitter and Facebook strictly to post things about, informational about you and your family and those kinds of things, as opposed to promoting either yourself or somebody else's work. And I think there has to be a happy medium myself. I've gotten noticed a lot because I have helped other people get noticed. And to me, that's one of the ways you can give back and help other people. That, if there's people like, I have so much respect for Michael Hyatt and Cliff Ravenscraft and what you're doing, and Jared Easley, Cynthia Sanchez. I mean, I love all those folks, and so I'm eager to help get their content spread on Twitter and Facebook and make sure that they're known. Same thing, Dan Franks and Gary Leland and Jared and Mitch Todd, they're all involved in this podcast movement, right? I'm doing everything I can to help promote that, because I think that's just a brilliant idea to have that conference here in August in the DFW area. So that's kind of the way I feel about it, is I want to help other people. And then if they, look at my content and think it's valuable and they want to help me back, then great. But I think, otherwise it doesn't matter how great your message is or how world changing it might be. You have to do something to get your name out there.
Yeah. And that's part of my argument. And I keep going back to an analogy of if I was thirsty, James, let me change the analogy to make it directly applicable. If I had just bought a cash car and it wasn't running, and you could have helped me with it, and because you didn't tell anybody about all the cool stuff you were doing, I got stuck with a broken car, mm-hmm. I might be kind of mad at you. Like, hey, you could have helped me, but you're just, you didn't tell anybody about the cool solution that you have. I usually say like a glass of water. If I'm thirsty and you've got a glass of water and you don't offer it to me, I'm going to be kind of upset.
Yeah.
And that's how I kind of view personal branding to some extent, some of the self-promotion, because I learned a long time ago that if I'm not going to promote myself, why should anybody else? And it's not being selfish, but it has to do with, at some level, in my opinion, confidence about what your message is, what you have to offer, and saying, I can benefit the world. I just have to tell the world that I have this benefit.
Right. And you're right. It is a bit of a confidence thing. And like I said, I suffered a bit when I started with this idea on that very topic. And it wasn't until Ray Edwards said, and I remember when he said it, I was so struck by it. He was like, listen, the idea that you have, there are people who are going to be able to send their children to college because of what you are doing. There are people who are going to be able to retire because of what you're doing. And in fact, that just gave me chills now. I'd
Yeah, it's
never
powerful. It
thought
is.
of it in that way, and and so that gave me more confidence to reach out and be bolder with trying to get my message out there. And again, I try not to beat people over the head with it, because I also don't want to turn people off to it, right? So I think there's a fine line between um, you know you know too much self promotion and making sure that you're getting noticed. And I know you're doing a lot of the right things too that I think are right, and that is, getting
Thank
to
you.
those face
I try.
well, getting to those face-to-face meetups, right? So then you're not just some person that somebody sees on Twitter or Facebook, posting about their content, but you're somebody that they've met, they've interacted with you, you've talked to them on a more personal level. And again, you and I have only met a couple of times. I mean, most of our interactions have been over Twitter and Facebook and so forth. And I feel like, you and I and a number of other people have developed some pretty good friendships that way.
Yeah.
So I think that can work, but I do agree there's a fine line. I know Grant Cardone is more somebody who likes to, continue to push the envelope into, he's like, keep putting yourself out there until people get annoyed at you, and keep putting yourself out there until they start complaining about you, and then keep putting yourself out there until they come to love you. He kind of feels like there's a couple of phases to that in his, I think it was the 10X rule book of his that I was reading a while back, and he talked about that. So yeah, I
I'll
think,
have to find that.
yeah, he's basically saying just work 10 times harder, right? he's, but
Don't leave anything on
exactly
the table.
right, exactly right. And but going back to your earlier statement about confidence, there's a quote that I remember, and it says it's a weak dog that won't wag its own tail. So so you do have to think about that, and but again, I do think there's a fine line. I think there are some people who do over promote, and their message gets muted on me when I see it, because I've seen it so many times. I'm like, okay, yeah, I've seen it, but by the same token, again, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, does it really fall? It doesn't matter how good your content is if nobody's seen it. You're not changing anybody's life that way, for sure.
Awesome. Any quick tip on buying a cash car? I know we're out of time.
Yeah, the one thing I would say, especially for people who are low end car buyers, or buying under that $5,000 range, buy from an individual. You don't want to go to a used car lot to buy a car that's that low end. And it's not because there aren't some good cars out there. There are. But if you will limit your searches to one owner, two owner cars, and then go to the individual's house, and then take in the environment, right? Is the yard mowed? Are the bushes trimmed? Is the house painted? If everything is manicured and taken care of pretty well, probably so is the car, and you'll want to look at the other reason I like buying from individuals is you get to look at the paperwork and so forth, right? All the records, and you see a pride of ownership in their eyes. So that's just a quick one-off kind of a tip there that I think it can make a huge difference. If people didn't do anything else but that, I think it would help them.
Yeah, I guess if you buy from a dealership at $5,000, you got to have some markup, and that markup would reduce the actual price of the car. And if you bought from an individual, instead of having that markup, you could get maybe a $500 better car.
Well, right, absolutely that, right? The individual also likely isn't a professional negotiator. They may be selling for some reason other than price, whereas the dealership's only in business to make money, and they're professional negotiators. And again, I got nothing against them. I just think that, I'm trying to shift the odds in your favor of finding that better cash car. And when you buy from the used car lot, yeah, you can do a Carfax report and you can look at that, but you cannot find, they won't have the records on the car. Oftentimes, again, especially if you buy a one or two owner car, the person will have the records of every, bit of work that's ever been done to that car. And you can look and see from the receipts, has the oil been changed in a timely manner, and all those kinds of things, which are really important to the maintenance side of buying a used car.
Awesome. Yeah, my first car I bought from a neighbor across the street. So, well, thanks, James. Appreciate you coming on the show. We'll have to do it again. I'll do a more structured, official interview and ask you all of the standard questions that we normally do and talk more about your background. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I'll let you get back to what you're up to.
All right. Thank you so much, Elliot. I appreciate you reaching out. It was an honor for me to be on your show. And again, I really love all the stuff you're doing. So thank you.
Again, a big thank you to James, who spent about 20 to 30 minutes talking to me today. A couple things that I wanted to mention that he had mentioned, or give you some specific details on. If you're going to be in the Dallas-Fort Worth area on March 4th, 2014 at 6:30 p.m. at 16633 Dallas Parkway, and I'll put the address for this in the show notes. You can go to empoweredpodcast.com/EP23, Empowered Podcast 23, and you'll get the address. But it's at a place called Improving Enterprises, and that's where James is talking about getting great interview subjects for your podcast and getting noticed, which is something that, as we just heard, James has really done an excellent job of over the last 7 months, and what a big impact it's had on his life, his family's life, and honestly all the people who have met him, heard his message, and listened to what the Cash Car Convert ideology is. So if you're in Dallas, I think James is talking for just a couple hours. I'll be there. At least I have plans to be there, and would love to meet you there and get to hear James talk about how to get great interviews and get noticed with your blog or podcast. This episode of the Empowered Podcast was brought to you by What's Next Blogging. And what What's Next Blogging is a tutorial website that shows you how to fix specific problems that you're having with your blog or your web page. If you're like me and you didn't know how to get a favicon, that little icon up in your web browser set up, or you didn't know exactly how to get Google Analytics going on your site to see how many visitors you were getting or traffic. What's Next Blogging has 5 to 10 minute videos that walk you step by step through the process of solving these specific problems, and they're only $2 to $3 a piece. And I highly recommend that you check that out. And if you've ever wondered, how do I do this with my blog or website, you can get a video that shows you exactly how to do it. And if they don't have those specific videos to answer your specific questions, you can actually get a free video by going there, asking the question, and if the video has not already been created, What's Next Blogging will create the video, solve your problem for you, and give it to you absolutely free. And then part of their business model is just to sell it to everyone else. So you get a free answer to your question. What's Next Blogging gets another topic that they can create another helpful video for, and then everybody else gets it for a really great price too. So thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Empowered Podcast. I'm your host, Ellery Wells. Thank you for spending time with me today. And on our next episode, I won't give you a teaser again. Go back to episode 22, and I can't wait to share that wisdom with you about getting going, getting off the couch, and doing something. Again, thanks for hanging out with me. We'll talk to you next time.